Good morning, guys. Friday, cold. And you can see, I love dressing like this. I love this style from the streets of Hillbrow from the 90s. Hoodie, bomber jacket, and a cap. It's a style we developed on the streets, and it's just stuck with me, from the years of bouncing and just street living. This is how we used to roll. You'll see a lot of the guys my age and that, they still roll like this. Because that's how we used to roll on the streets. It was like a uniform. If you saw someone dressed like this, chances were you came from our hood. So, sort of like New York City, you can tell if a guy comes from New York City. If you live in the States, you can see immediately, just by the way a guy dresses, if he comes from New York, or if he comes from LA, or if he comes from somewhere else, just by the style he adopts. To a certain degree, you can even see it here. You can check guys that come from Soweto, or guys that come from Aldos, or whatever the case may be. And a lot of the guys from Aldos still roll like this. But I need to have a serious chat with you guys about, our country and where we're at right now. And I want you to listen to me because I'm older. I've had a lot of time to live here and see the way things go here. And, I'm going to start with this Colonel Jacobs. Let me start there before I get into that. Excuse me. What did I tell you yesterday? Before yesterday's commission started, what did I tell you? I told you that guy is lying. That guy this whole thing has been manipulated. You're not getting that amount of drugs out of a police station without senior police involvement. Didn't I tell you that? The Madlanga Commission, sorry, I don't remember the names of all the commissioners, but that's not because I'm disrespectful in any way. I hold those commissioners in absolutely high regard because I've seen them ask the tough questions, and what I do know from watching them and listening to them is that if you get called as a witness to that commission and you are in any way condescending or feel like that you've got the cat by the nuts and you're going to pull the wool over these people's eyes for whatever reason, you might have a racial predisposition. You might have some kind of superiority complex, or like this colonel and a lot of these brigadiers and generals that have gone to that commission, you think because you have rank that as per normal your rank is going to intimidate these people. You're talking about ex-constitutional judges and high-level advocates here. They don't care. They don't care about your rank. They don't care about your race. They don't care about your self-image in terms of your idea that you are somehow possibly superior to whoever is there. Advocates and lawyers, I've faced many of them, and I've been defended by many of them. We used to have a joke when we were in the game. The lawyers would come with their robes and we would say to them, "Yes, brother, any friend of Batman's is a friend of mine," because they really are. They're like Batman. When they put that robe on, let me tell you, it's like an impenetrable shield of armor that they put on, and they take on a completely different persona. They become fearless and they'll ask anyone any question, and you are standing there and you have to answer those questions. And let me tell you what I'm reading when I see and I watch Jacobs. First of all, you're dealing with a deeply insecure human being. Deeply insecure. You can see his insecurity in the way that he presents himself, in the way that he dresses, in the way that he wears a fake gold watch and has got a gold tooth in his mouth, in the way that he presents himself. He's a deeply insecure individual, and he's insecure, and I'll tell you why he's insecure. He's insecure because he knows, he knows that the vast majority, this is my opinion, that's not fact, the vast majority of the successes that his unit has been achieving over X amount of time with drugs is due to someone in his unit, or more than one person in his unit, that he fears. He fears these individuals because they are better at the job. They are better at the job. And he relies upon these individuals to bring the cases that he's getting the credit for, right? And personally, this is the reason I believe 100% that he was the architect, A, of Saunders being removed from that unit, and B, the architect of those drugs being stolen. But he was not alone in that, and more than that, as well as being the architect, he was receiving instructions on those drugs from people of a higher authority than him. And when the story started, he figured out in his mind, because he's so insecure, that he can remove his greatest threat and challenge, which is Saunders, all right? Because Saunders has been in the police as long as he has. And I can almost guarantee you, from watching the Madlanga Commission and listening to the way that these guys have been speaking, that Saunders and whoever Saunders is working with, in other words, these people that Jacob said that have animosity towards him and that there's still tension there, and that's why he didn't contact these guys, he rather contacted that guy in order to secure the scene and all of that stuff. You see, these speak to insecurities. He's very, very worried that if he doesn't put his own people there, that the truth will come out, that the actual people doing the work and the actual people responsible for all these successes is in fact not him, you know. And he is absolutely relied upon the equity system within the police to achieve his rank. Because just by looking at those two individuals, I can automatically, A, as an ex-policeman, and B, as a street thug, tell you which one of those two individuals I would be more worried about on the street. And it's not Jacobs. It's not Jacobs. Because you can tell who the dedicated cop is there. And then you can see he dropped a major bomb on himself when he said this towards the end of his testimony, when he said, perhaps I'm not as articulate as people that come on here and turn themselves into national heroes. And there we have it. There we have it. This is his fallback. His fallback is that the only reason he's being persecuted at the Madlanga Commission is because Saunders speaks better than him. But the reality of the situation is this, is that it's not that Saunders speaks better than him, or is perhaps more intelligent than him, or is perhaps a better policeman than him. Those things are, in my view, a given, right? But the problem is this, is that he now knows that he is being exposed for his deficiencies, A, and B, he's going to be exposed and implicated, and possibly, in my view, if it's correctly investigated, arrested for the theft of those drugs. Because if you look at the sequence of events, it is absolutely 100% clear that he manipulated this sequence of events in order that those drugs were at that place, at that time, where people could remove them. And I'm going to tell you right now, I would not be shocked. In fact, I would be suspicious, and I would investigate as to who his clique are and where were they at the time that those drugs went missing, and who are their connections within the criminal underworld. And I think their phone should also be taken for forensic analysis to see who exactly those group of people were communicating with during the period of that bust taking place and over the 6 months up until or 5 months up until the theft of those drugs. But he is a key player. And he knows that Sanders knows that he's the guy. That is why he had to get Sanders out of there. That is why they manipulated the evidence to get Sanders and others out of there. And if I don't know this, but if I were to hazard a guess, if we look at who was all implicated in the theft of the drugs by that colonel and others, all right, you will find that it is Sanders and the team he works with. Because now he could get the drugs and he could remove Sanders and the threat to him in terms of his career, if I can put it that way. Then what I didn't know, I found out last night, that the very thing that I said to you guys yesterday morning, that exact thing, almost play by play, had already been brought to the Madlanga Commission by Major General Flynn, who was already investigated and has been investigating, he's the chief investigator for that drug theft, has been investigating that theft from the absolute exact angle that I presented to you guys yesterday, but I didn't know it. I heard it last night. And over the course of the weekend, I'm going to make a point of going to watch Major General Flynn's testimony. Because from what was brought up in Jacobs' testimony yesterday, I think Flynn is on the money here. Just based on the little bit I saw yesterday. You know, stories like generals phoning and saying, we want our drugs back, this and that, from Pretoria. You know? And they're actually not the smartest of the smart, Oaksbury. Actually. Right? Because I would have manipulated it in a different way. He was already manipulating it in a way, I couldn't go here, I couldn't go there, they didn't have space, they didn't have this, they didn't have that. Right? Then as, let's say, I'm the general that's involved in the actual smuggling of this 1/2 ton consignment, right? And I want my drugs back. I would have then said, all right, you got no space down there? No problem. Bring it to Pretoria. Bring it to Pretoria. And then manipulate those drugs into a place where I would have access to them in Pretoria. I would have put them all through all those processes. And I'll tell you right now, once they'd found that it's drugs and it's this and you're a general, you know, there's plenty you can do. I would have just swapped those drugs out. I would have swapped them out. So we've already proven they're drugs. We've got the examples with da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Right, they're going now for destruction, lacquer. In that space where they've been forensically analyzed, they're drugs, to the space where they are about to be destroyed. They're with me in Pretoria. I would have just swapped them out with something else that's not drugs. And burnt the non-drugs and taken the real drugs. You see? But the problem with that, there would have been only one problem with that. If you got caught with that, there would have been a problem. And the other problem might have been that this Jacobs and his crew in Natal would be very unhappy because they're criminals. You understand this? They're all gangsters. So they all want to cut of that pie. They all want to cut of that pie. So if that general had said, I'm bringing these drugs to Pretoria, and Jacobs felt that him and his crew and his people are not going to get a slice of that pie, it would have been very easy for him to say, if you do that, I'm going to expose you. You understand? Not that he would have said that, but it would have been in the people in Pretoria's minds that, you know, if we don't cut these oaks in, the chances are very good that they're going to sell us out. Because that's crime. That's how it goes. But absolutely 100%, Colonel Jacobs manipulated that entire bust in order that those drugs could be returned to whoever's drugs they are, or other criminals within his networks. So I'll give you an example. This is a real life example again. I'm starting to enjoy giving you real life examples, okay? Because then you can start understanding where I get my thinking from, okay? So early 2000, in fact 2000, right? I myself was arrested for drug-related crimes that I committed, okay? And my bail was denied, and I was in Modderby prison, A section, awaiting trial, okay? And just trying to survive in prison. And, you know, what I found in prison, firstly, is that policemen don't get treated badly by other inmates in prison. That's the first thing that I found. And in fact, ex-policemen are utilized by other inmates to assist them with their own cases and legal matters. They become like prison lawyers, if I can say it like that, you know? Because criminals are not as stupid as people think they are. You know what I mean? So they utilize the talents of policemen that are inside there to write statements, to give advice on cases and all that type of thing. And those policemen earn a little bit of cash from the inmates like that. That's what I did. And while doing this, you know, I became relatively well known in the prison because a couple of the guys that I wrote statements for, A, got bail, and B, got their cases tossed out, right? So, you know, the word spread, and, you know, more and more guys were coming to me, hey, can't you just help me with this? Sweet, let's have a look. Okay, well, this is what I would do. All right, and then writes a statement. The guy goes, some guys didn't get off, but a lot of guys did and got their bail. So they arrested a guy at OR Tambo Airport, Colombian National. They arrested him at OR Tambo Airport with two suitcases containing 30 kilograms of cocaine. All right? And took custody of him and took custody of the cocaine. And he was then brought to Modderby prison, and he was put in the single cells away from general population. You know what I mean? And we all heard about this, you know what I mean? And it was like a big talking point in the prison. Hey, drugs, yeah, okay. And one day, a prison warden came to our cell and he said, listen, Dave, don't you and Johnny just want to come with me to the single cells? Is it okay? I want to talk to you. And I was like, all right, cool, let's go. So we took a trap there, and lo and behold, here was this Colombian guy. Now, the bonus of this is that my mate Johnny is Portuguese as well, and had a very good understanding of Spanish. You know, what a coincidence, eh? And I'm not going to give you like the whole interaction, but what it boiled down to was this, is that this Colombian guy said to Johnny that his cartel had authorized him to release $1 million cash to anyone who could secure his freedom and get the drugs back, 30 kilos of coke. And because the word in the prison was, A, I'm an ex-cop, and B, I had certain other connections in the criminal underworld, that possibly, you know, I would be the right guy to be able to facilitate this deal. And I went and I sat and I thought about this for about 20 minutes, you know, and I went back to the guy with Johnny and I said, look, bro, if I was able to do that, please believe me, I would not be sitting in this prison myself. If I was able to do that, I would not be sitting here myself. That was the first reason I gave him. The second reason in my mind that I made this excuse, all right, because the reality is with $1 million, right? Okay, which at that point was about 12 million rand, 11 or 12, maybe even 10 million rand. If I had 12 million rand, I could have got myself out of that prison very, very quickly, all right? And but the main reason I didn't do the deal is because I didn't want to be chained to international drug cartels for the rest of my life. Because this is what people must understand. Once you're in, you're in. Once you're in, you're in. There's no out. When you're in, you're in. And especially with that level of criminal. You understand? And let's say I'd taken the money and I'd got him out and I'd got the drugs back, right? Who's the only link? Who's the only link in that chain that is expendable? Me, no? And I declined. And thank God I did. You know what I mean? I don't know what happened after that. I don't know if he got out. I don't know if they got their drugs back. I don't know. But that's how it works, bro. That's how it works. So I just wanted to give you a little personal example of how I know and why I think the way I think, right? So that you can get a better understanding of where I get my understanding from, okay? When I say I've been in it, I mean it. Hey, I'm a poet and I don't know it. I was in it and I'm in it, right? So now I want to just talk to South Africans about what I'm seeing here in South Africa, right? And it's exceptionally troublesome, all right? For those of us that have clawed our way out of a dark and desperate place in our lives and have managed to build a life in this country, to watch what is going on here that is very possibly going to threaten our livelihoods and our existence in South Africa. And this is this anti-foreigner mission that one particular group of people is hammering on, and that same particular group of people is saying that, you know, the next thing is they're going to take control because they're the biggest tribe in South Africa. Now, this is problematic because now you're starting to talk about insurrection and revolution. And, you know, I'm seeing headings now on the internet, coup d'etat imminent. Military has said that the government is Mickey Mouse, blah, 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 blah. Now, this is a big problem. And it's not a big problem for, well, a lot of people that can, you know, that have the means just to out of here. It's going to be a big problem for the people that are left here. What people don't understand is that if this were to turn into a full civil war in South Africa, first thing is this, is that millions of people are going to storm the borders to get out of here. And Botswana, Namibia, Zimbabwe, Mozambique particularly are going to have a refugee crisis that they are going to be unable to contend with. Secondly, in terms of that refugee crisis, they already are struggling to feed their own people. Not all of them, but most of them. Namibia is tiny. It's a massive land expanse, but in terms of population, it's tiny. They wouldn't be able to handle 10 million or 5 million or 2 million refugees coming across the border. Neither would Botswana, neither would Zim, and neither would Mozambique. They will not be able to handle the influx of that many refugees, because the truth is if a war broke out here, most people, most civilians are going to flip and run for those borders. All right? That's point one. So you're going to have a humanitarian catastrophe at that level. All right. Number two is this, okay? People who are going to stay and fight, in other words, armed militia, armed guerrillas, whoever they may be, right? The first thing they're going to do is they're going to cut all water supply, cut all electricity supply, and cut all food supply to major population centers and take control of those routes, whoever they may be. They're going to take control of the supply chain logistical routes. While that's going on, they're going to take control of airports, ports, so on and so forth. That will be the drive by people who know military tactics. That's what they're going to do. And where they've cut off the water, food, and electricity supply, they're going to make sure that they are in control of all those supplies. So if you want electricity, you want food, you want water, you're going to have to affiliate and align yourself with that particular militia or rebel group in that area. And then what's going to happen is that millions and millions and millions and millions of South Africans are going to start dying from hunger, lack of water, exposure, etc., etc., etc. The farmers will stop producing immediately. Military personnel will in fact sabotage and burn those farms to the ground in order to starve the population out. And you're going to be sitting with a catastrophe in this country like you've never seen in Africa ever before. So it's easy to run around and carry on the way you're carrying on. But I'm telling you, you're busy creating something that is going to explode out of your control. You think you are still in control of this thing, and possibly you are, but you are not going to remain in control of it. It is going to explode beyond your control, and when it explodes beyond your control, I want to know if you are going to take responsibility for the millions of South Africans that are going to die as a result of what you are igniting here now. Because you are igniting a full-on civil war here. That is what you are doing. And the people that are going to suffer the hardest and the most and die the most from hunger, etc., and disease and all of that is black South Africans. Black South Africans. Because when we start running to the borders to escape this, those countries are going to block us and they're going to say, weren't you kicking us out the other day? Weren't you kicking us out? Weren't you saying no foreigners in your country? No problem. Do you have a Mozambican passport? No. Footsack. Do you? Yes. Welcome home, brother. Do you have a Zimbabwean passport? No. Yeah. Footsack. Do you? Yes, you're Zimbabwean. Come home, brother. Foreign African countries will be flying in military aircraft to get their citizens out. You are going to have to stay here. You are going to have to deal with the thing that you have ignited. And you are the ones that are going to die of hunger. You. Because in all the years of democracy, you've built no systems. You've built no systems. You've built no farms or cultivated any farms that you took away, that you gave to people, you've destroyed them. You've destroyed your own electricity supply already, 90% of it. You've destroyed your own water supply, which is busy collapsing anyway. And the guys that produce the food will just stop producing, will take the money they have, get on planes and disappear. Because no bank can claim from you for a bond on your farm in a war zone. They're off the hook. And Donald Trump is saying, we've got farms, we can help, come work here. And they'll leave. So you'll have no food. And you'll have thousands of people running around in the streets looting empty shops. The shops will be empty. These big corporates will just write off their losses and claim from Lloyd's of London for civil insurrection and get their money back. The only people that are going to lose is you. Is you. You will have full control of ashes. So let's just wind our necks in here a bit and start figuring out how exactly we're going to solve this problem the right way. You know, if you can get thousands of people to run in the streets and rip foreigners out of their shops, why can't you mobilize those same thousands of people to build a school? If you've got time to run around in the streets and you've got energy to run around in the streets, then surely you have the energy to put one brick on top of another brick. Huh? Give it some thought. Your energy is in the wrong place. Your energy is once again focused on destruction. Destruction of what? Whether they're here legally, illegally, in my mind, in this particular example, is irrelevant. You know what I mean? These guys have created something, most of them. They've created a shop, they've created a business, they've created something. Your answer to that is pull him out, break down his shop, destroy his shop, when you yourself have never built a shop or started a shop. You know, it's easy to start a shop, right? It's easy to start a shop. It's really easy. But it takes work, and it takes dedication, and it takes commitment, and it takes perseverance to build that shop into a successful business. You're not prepared to do that, but you're angry with the people that are. And once they've all gone, those shops are still going to stand empty. No one is going to take them over. You're not. You're not. How do I know you're not? Because you haven't till now. In 30 years, you haven't started a shop. And that's it. You really got to start thinking carefully. And you know what, I want to just tell you, you better start cutting out this white people are foreigners, white South Africans are foreigners, Indian South Africans are foreigners. You better cut that out. You better cut that out. Let me tell you right now. Stop even thinking in that direction. Please believe me. My last example of that is what mobilized the United States to go and take on Iran. The danger to the people of Iran by that regime. And also just remember, just so that you understand, Israel has not forgotten what you did. Just keep that in mind. And while that is in the back of your mind, also understand that you're alienating the whole of Africa against you in favor of the Western powers, whom they once despised. Give that some thought. Lekker. Cheers.